So, any thoughts on the Dm&E project?
Well, this was a huge issue a few years back with them running mini coal trains through Rochester, essentially bisecting our town. It's diminished some from the limelight, but it remains every bit important today as it was then. And part of the issue, as I see it, is Kevin Schieffer from Dm&E was just an absolutely impossible person to work with, and I suspect that as they become part of this larger rail network, he's not going to find himself in a position to work with the communities, because he tried to bully Rochester, and that was unacceptable. The reality is we cannot be transporting hazardous toxic chemicals by the Mayo Clinic, which would be absolutely impossible to evacuate at high speeds frequently during the day. It's just a non-starter. We cannot have this rail line going through Rochester in its current capacity as speeds and numbers of trains are elevated. It's not going to happen, and Dm&E has to understand this from the start. Now, I don't want to be the kind of person, though, that just says no to everything without offering any kind of solutions. And in this particular case, I do have a proposal that I would champion that I think is to the benefit of the city, to the benefit of the region, and to the benefit of the Dm&E line. In particular, what I would propose is that we look at a southern bypass of Rochester, and perhaps even bypassing Rochester and then continuing on a southerly track towards the Mississippi River. The reason why I propose this is because it gives us an opportunity to kill a number of birds with one stone. There are a number of issues out there that we can address with this. And the idea that I would have is that this would be a multifaceted rail, this new section of rail. Essentially what we do is somewhere to the west of us, perhaps even before Byron, begin a bypass where the Dm&E rail heads south to the interstate corridor and eventually passes through the airport property, and then either heads back north to regain the original line, or continues in a easterly path towards the river where they can meet up with barge traffic there. Now, the reason why this is an idea that I champion is because there are a few things that are not going on in Rochester right now that could be. First and foremost, we have an underutilized airport, and we have a lot of capacity to get involved in the freight industry. By having the tracks go through the airport, we have, at one location, we can have access to freeway, we can have access to air freight, and we can also have access to a rail. That's a recipe for a lot of jobs in an area that Rochester does not participate fully in our economy in. That's a win-win for the community, and it's probably a win-win for the railroad as well. The second thing that I'd point out is that the expanded, these new tracks would essentially be passing through farmland initially, and that allows us to mitigate the concerns that we have with railroads by creating a green corridor where we can have a lot of space on each side, essentially green belting the city of Rochester. It takes care of some of the noise concerns, and it also takes care of some of the pollution concerns from just coal dust coming off of cars. A third reason why I like this is because this can be a part of an eventual transit connection between the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport in Bloomington, Rochester, and then on to places like Madison, Wisconsin, and Chicago. The reality is, in a time of increasing fuel prices, which includes jet fuel, of course, it does not make sense to fly planes from Rochester to Minneapolis, or even from Minneapolis to Chicago. There's a more efficient way. By using high-speed rail network, we can essentially get between the two places just as fast as we would on an airplane, but we can do it consuming a lot less energy and without all the hassles that go along with airline travel, and also generating much, much less pollution. So the idea is that this is something that can benefit Rochester commuters, this is something that can benefit our economy, and it's also something that benefits Dm&E, because right now Rochester and Mayo are not going to yield on passing their trains through our city. And the other advantage of this is once you get into regional transit, once you get into something that benefits the community as well as the railroad, Dm&E's largest concern with the bypass is they don't want to pay for the entire bypass themselves. It's incredibly expensive to build new rail networks. With this, you have many parties that tend to benefit, and you have many groups that will also be contributing tax dollars to a project like this. And what that does is it makes it more reasonable to consider a project like this. It's this kind of forward-looking thinking, addressing many issues with the same thing, with one project, that I think is critical for leaders of Rochester to be thinking about in the future.